Regular readers will know that I have written many columns about energy narratives in Alberta and in Canada more generally. It's a fascinating topic and one that I think needs a lot more attention. And Nathan Lemphers with the Smart Prosperity Institute has written about it in a recent blog post. So we're going to talk to him about that. Welcome to the interview, Nathan.
Thanks for having me on, Markham.
Let's start with, why don't you give us an overview of your blog post, please?
Sure. So this blog post essentially starts with the premise that change is underway in the energy system, and that the transportation sector is moving towards electrified mobility. And that's going to have profound impacts, not just for how people move around, but for how people produce energy. And in particular for Alberta. And that Alberta needs to brace for change for how people demand the oil and gas that is produced in the province. So what that preparation means for me is beyond getting the right policies in place, having the right technocratic solutions at the right price point. It's also being able to tell the right story and the right storyteller. They both matter. And in Alberta, there's been a consistent narrative of perpetual growth for the oil and gas industry, and that's running up against the current market realities for producers like Alberta, who tend to be higher cost, who tend to be further away in supply chains from other places to the United States. So what I'm trying to put forward in this editorial piece was that Alberta needs new stories and new storytellers to better prepare Alberta for this impending change.
Here's a theme in Alberta energy narratives that is very difficult to overcome. And that is the idea that what's the change that you and I both agree is well underway. We're probably about 2 decades into it. And this is the 2020s will be, as I say, buckle up. It's the disruptive decade. But that is denied by far too many folks associated with the industry in Alberta, because they argue that change is being driven by ideology in government, ideology in activists that are pushing those governments, and not by structural change, not by new technologies and new markets and new priorities for investors. Doesn't that really impede the emergence of new narratives and different storytelling?
Absolutely. What it does is tie the hands of Albertans. It binds them from being able to have any sort of agency in their role in this energy future. Instead of playing the blame game, blaming Ottawa, or it could be blaming radical foreign environmentalists on these sorts of problems that are facing the industry, there's not the stories or the questions of, okay, these technologies are changing, the economics are changing for this industry. How can we still squeeze out value from the industry, or perhaps nurture and support a new industry that'll prosper for our children?
Here's an interesting, I appreciate your point of view on this. I find that there's a X amount of bandwidth in the public discourse for the energy narrative. There's only so much we can talk about energy, and people are on to other things and so on. But the bandwidth that's available is very often taken up with these crises like the cancellation of Keystone XL and threats to go and sue the American government and so on. It sucks the oxygen out of the room, and it prevents Alberta and Canada really more broadly from having the kind of conversations and telling the kind of stories that are really required.
Those sort of crises of the day aren't going to be going away. They're going to be increasing in frequency as time wears on in this decade of disruption. So I don't think it's a matter of seeing those as distractions, but as using those as opportunities to reorient and say, okay, that here's the old story, and now here's the new story that we're using, and using the crisis of the day as the impetus to have that conversation and keep at it, because those crises will change from month to month and year to year.
So I'm one of the energy transition storytellers that you refer to. Well, you don't refer to me by name, but I'm one of the people who are doing the thing that you think should be more of it should be done. And I can tell you from personal experience how difficult it is in Alberta to get those stories told to any kind of significant audience. So, assuming that there's more people like me and wherever they might be who want to tell those stories, how do we go about it? And what platforms do we use? And, how do we get people interested?
Well, I think you're doing one of these platforms through Energy Media and using social media and alternative outlets that aren't necessarily through mainstream media or controlled by, conservative editorial boards. But it's about forming different community-based organizations. That's well underway in Alberta. There's growing numbers of community organizations that are starting to do that, have different conversations around how do oil patch workers transition, how do enthusiastic electric vehicle owners, raise awareness with their neighbors. Those things are happening. But I think for storytellers, beyond beyond Albertan to Albertan peer to peer, you also need to look at the top echelons of Albertan society as well, of who are those people with significant influence and authority and legitimacy in Albertan society that can have a disproportionate impact. So it's going beyond the Markham Hislops to people who are leading companies, who are leading, political parties or what have you, or cultural leaders in the province that can start talking about where the province needs to be going, what's next beyond oil.
Nathan, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem.